Kia ora, it's Chris with Earth Sciences New Zealand with the seasonal climate outlook. We've made it through winter, thankfully. I'm sure there are those that like winter, and if you do, there's actually a good amount of snow coming for the Southern Alps. More on that in a minute. Look, this is the spring outlook. We are recording this on the third day of September. We are in the Burr months. That is September, October, and November, otherwise known as spring. Let's get to it. Here are the headlines. I'll disappear. Here's what you need to know. Yeah, look, a westerly wind will be the dominant wind direction. So should be more like westerly quarter. Southwest, west, northwest. That will become less common as the spring season unfolds, and that means a roller coaster ride. Now, there was a bit of debate here in the room. Is roller coaster one word or two words? We went with one word. Anyway, call it what you want. We're going to be on a roller coaster ride with regards to our temperatures over the next couple of weeks. That is through about the middle, well, much of September, let's say, but certainly the next through mid-September anyway. And then as we go toward late September, especially later toward October and November, we will start to see a more decided trend toward settled weather as high pressure kicks in. And that is because of La Niña. More on that in a second. Right. So let's get to it. Here's the skinny. Again, I'll disappear, go full frame. Here's what you need to know for temperatures. Now, we are thinking because of this roller coaster ride, especially for the month of September, we may not see above average temperatures everywhere. In fact, there's a chance we could end up straight up near average. So we're saying average or above average. I'll come back on screen here just to illustrate this. So if this is average and this is above average, we're going to be somewhere in this zone for much of the country. Now, for eastern areas, beg your pardon, make that western areas of the South Island, because of eventually a more of an easterly wind, maybe not in September, we think that will be an area where above average temperatures are most likely. Let's go to rainfall. And rainfall for the next 3 months, yeah, a little bit of variability here, huh? So for the North Island, for eastern and northern parts of the North Island, because this is an area, as well as the North and South Island. So basically the northern part of both islands, the eastern part of the North Island, this is where we think rainfall could be above normal. So if there's going to be a wetter than usual spring, if it is likely to be in these areas in this, I guess, tealish green for the upper North Island, eastern North Island, and the upper South Island. Now, for the rest of the South Island, where we see this gold color disappearing, this is where dryness may be a concern. So, bit of uncertainty. So, we're going either normal or below normal. So, coming back on screen once again, so normal or below normal in this spectrum. So, again, as a friendly reminder, the seasonal climate outlook, it is not a weather forecast. This is a theme forecast. What we're doing here is we're setting the scene for the next 3 months. And, things will move around a bit. Weather is day to day. Climate is more longer term. So to give another analogy, if I may, because I like giving analogies, think of the climate outlook as the forest and the weather forecast as the trees in the forest. Now, if we get it right, or generally right, we will identify that the trees in the forest are congruent with one another. There may be some oddities. Look, if it's a pine forest, sure, you may see a nical, you may see a fern. But if we're saying the forest is going to be pine-like, for the most part, that'll be the theme or the expectation over the coming 3 months, if you catch my drift. So for the west of the North Island, we are expecting near normal rainfall. But look, there's uncertainty here simply because of how things shake out as the rest of spring unfolds. So let's get to it. I'll talk more about the impacts, too. I'll come back to this and circle about. Well, actually, let's talk about it now. We got to watch out for dryness for the west of the South Island. Why is this a big deal? Well, up until recently, again, recording this on the third day of September, snowfall has been woefully inadequate for much of the Southern Alps. And we've had kind of a dryish sort of winter. Guess what? As you know, a lot of our electricity is generated from hydroelectricity, the hydro catchments in the South Island. So if the snowfall is inadequate, and we're going to get some snow, so that's a good thing. That'll help us out. But if the rainfall, too, is inadequate over the coming months, that could spell problems for the hydro catchments. Also, agricultural areas going off screen here, full frame. Agricultural areas in Canterbury where there's irrigation. Could be an early start to the irrigation season if, as we go into October and November, as things start to warm up and growing start to kick in, that could be a problem. And we also need to watch out for potentially some big rain events for the northern and eastern part of the North Island as well as the top of the South Island. Let's go back on screen and kind of get into the detail now for starting off with kind of the weather space in this forecast continuum, as I like to call it. So it's a continuum: weather forecast, subseasonal forecast, then long range forecast. So again, recording this on the third day of September. What do we have here? Well, let's go to the telestrator. You can see where I'm pointing. Red is high pressure. Blue is lower pressure. These are pressure anomalies, so the air forecast to be higher than usual, the air pressure, I should say, over the North Island, especially to our northeast. There's low pressure to our south. This is, there's our northwest flow. This is going to create a northwest flow, so a good drop of rain is coming for the west of the South Island. In fact, let's go to our ensemble model. And what we have here, I'll hit pause just to set the scene here. So what this is, we're looking at three scenarios. On the left is kind of the floor. So I'll disappear here, by the way. On the left is the floor. So think of this as there's a really, really, really high chance the amounts that are shown will eventuate. And I'll put this back into motion so we can watch it unfold. On the far right where I'm pointing, this is a high-end scenario. This is pretty unlikely, probably not going to occur. In fact, it's very unlikely this will occur. We call this the 90th percentile. But if things got real heavy with rainfall, it could look something like this. And then in the middle is kind of the middle-of-the-road scenario, the 50th percentile. So it's a good way of understanding what are we up against in terms of rainfall amounts over the next 5 days. So this is a 5-day forecast. You can see it's valid in the wee hours of Monday morning. And you can see there will be a good drop of rain for the western area of the South Island. Even the 10th percentile, which is kind of a guaranteed scenario, if you will, you can see a lot of 50 to even 100 millimeter amounts of rainfall by early Monday, and a lot of this is going to fall before the weekend. And on the far right, you can see this is the high-end scenario. You can see 1 to 200 millimeters or more, pretty common across the higher elevations. Again, if you get above about 1,000 meters, this will fall as substantial snow. Mueller Hut and many areas in Aotearoa, Mount Cook will be finding a lot of snow over the next couple of days. 1, maybe 2 meters of snow is likely over the next few days above 1,000, maybe 1,500 meters. It's got to be pretty high up. And you can see for the North Island, not a lot of rain is forecast apart from the Aotearoas, where a good 50 millimeters or so are possible. But you can see much of the rain is going to be in the west of the South Island. In fact, coming back on screen, we think September is going to be wetter than normal for the west of the South Island, which tells us if we're going to have a normal to below normal 3-month period, that faucet is probably going to shut off or at least become a drip as we get into September and especially November. All right, then, let's go back to the weather space. Here we go. So looking beyond the 4th and 5th of September, you can see that low slides away. Then another low develops. So it's going to get quite active, it looks like, as we work our way into, say, the 6th, the 7th, the 8th, the 9th, sort of that end of week 1, start of week 2. You see a lot of blue in the map. So this is telling us unsettled weather. So beyond what I showed you on the 3 panel, which is this, we got more rain coming. So what do? Let's go to our NIWA 35. Let's have a look at what is expected in terms of themes, rainfall themes, over the next 3 months. So here we go. No, not that. Where is it? I'll find it. Hold on. This is not good viewing. Here it is, Chris. So week 1, ignore this. So this is basically, we already covered this with the ensembles, right? Week 2, we still see a bit of a westerly theme. How do we know that? Because you can see western and upper areas of the South Island are favored to have a wet period. So this is basically for the period, as we can see, in September up to the 8th. So we're looking at from the 8th to the 15th, and then here from the 15th to the 22nd. You can see there is a theme for maybe the eastern part. We could see a bit of an easterly, perhaps, period of wind because the eastern areas of both islands are favored to have above normal rainfall. Again, this is over a 7-day period. Where you see the white, this is saying that the expectation is expected to be near normal with regards to rainfall. And we see some tinges of brown across the Bay of Plenty and far northern parts of the North Island. If we go a little farther ahead into September, so this is the 22nd to the 29th of September, things starting to dry out a little bit. We can see rainfall likely to be near normal or below normal for this particular week, mid to late September. Much of the central North Island, perhaps still a bit of a westerly wind because we're seeing areas on the western side of the South Island favored to see maybe above normal rainfall, some lighter green being indicated there. And you can see a bit of brown potentially. It's spotty across the eastern South Island, further sort of indicating or supporting, I should say, that sort of west, maybe northwest wind. And then as we work away from the end of September into the first few days of October, a dry signal for much of the North Island. And that is because high pressure is forecast to become more dominant as we get toward the very end of September and especially into October. And where that high sets up will ultimately dictate where do we see the driest conditions and where might we see some rain. If the high is where my cursor is, a bit over the North Island, we could still get a westerly wind for western and lower areas of the South Island, which is probably why we see some tinges of green. You may be wondering about temperatures in the shorter term, so let's go have a look at that. So again, in summary, a wet start to spring for the west of the South Island. You can see there'll be a couple weeks here. We have the green pretty prominent over western areas of the South Island. This is good news. This will fall as snow, but again, it could be pretty high up, 1,000 meters or so and higher. And then we could see a switch in the pattern with perhaps some drier conditions for the western areas of both islands, with the rainfall perhaps abundant for the mid-September period for eastern parts of the North Island. And then things may tend to become more settled. Notice we don't see as much green late September, early October. We see actually a bit more brown, indicating that kind of trend towards settled conditions. So I want to switch gears and talk more about our ocean temperatures. We have progressed toward La Niña. So let's hit play. I'm going to get my cursor out and we're going to make this. Is this going to be a beefy? Oh, yeah, I like the wide cursor. It's so much better. So let's play, or put it in motion, I should say, play this through. So one thing you'll notice is that as I hit pause, going back to July, actually, I want to set the scene. Focus your attention in this area. We're going to see the blues become more widespread and, dare I say, probably a bit darker. So as we moved through the month of July and as we moved through the month of August, you can see this area across the tropical Pacific, the blues becoming a lot more. Look at that. You can see some darker blues. These blues you can see here, let me get rid of this. This area right here I'm circling. Watch what happens when you look at start of September, September 1, compare that with July. You see there was red there, so warmer than usual ocean temperatures. So once again, what we're looking at are sea surface temperatures anomalies, so difference from average. Where you see the red or orange, that is where ocean temperatures are observed. This is an observation to be warmer than usual. Where you see the blue, that is where ocean temperatures are cooler than usual. And what La Niña is when we have cooler than usual temperatures in this part of the Pacific Ocean, the equatorial Pacific, and we have this area of warmer than usual ocean temperatures over toward what we call the maritime continent. So the maritime continent, Indonesia, over toward Papua New Guinea, very far northern areas of Australia. You can see this area is warmer than usual. This creates what's called a dipole. So in this area where we have unusually, this is a classic, by the way, horseshoe configuration. Looks like a horseshoe. This is a classic La Niña configuration or spatial pattern. And what this is telling us is that we're going to have sink favored in this area, and we're going to have lift favored over here. In fact, we can go to subsurface and we can look at this. So we're not only looking, so this right here, disappear. We're just looking at the skin, the top of the ocean. When I bring this up, we're looking at it like we're at an aquarium, like you're at Kelly Tarleton's, and you're seeing, you're looking at the aquarium. You can see the top, and you can see a cross section. And you can see this is depth. So 50 meters now to 450 meters. And over here, this is the date line where my cursor is. This is the international date line, all right? And over here where I'm pointing, this is toward the South American coast. There is a lot of unusually cool water at 50, 100 meters below the surface. And there is a lot of unusually warm water west of the date line, basically at and beneath the surface. And with this, what's going to happen is this right here we're looking at, this is forecast to persist and continue to surface. So we have this area that I'm pointing to where my cursor is, where unusually cool water is going to continue to reach higher or toward the top of the ocean. And that is when that happens, that will reinforce this dipole. That's what we're looking at, quite frankly. This is a dipole. We have unusually cool water to the east and unusually warm water to the west. And what that creates, it affects what we call the rising and sinking of motion in the air, rising motion, sinking motion. And if you've watched this before, thank you. If you've not, welcome. Why we are interested in ocean temperatures and where it's unusually warm and unusually cool ocean temperatures is that it drives where there's going to be large-scale rising motion and large-scale sinking motion. So have a look at this. This is velocity potential. We're at the very top of the atmosphere, right? And over toward, say, this part of the world, over toward the maritime continent, you can see a bit of sink is forecast. But as you move through time, look at the rise that develops over Indonesia, over the maritime continent, sneaking down into the Coral Sea. Meanwhile, we have sinking air over the Eastern Pacific. This, my friend, as you can see, as we get toward October, November, December, January, you can see in this region that I'm pointing to, that rise becomes more profound. And by the way, as we continue with this rise will be what we're expecting could be a source of persistent rainfall and also a source as we move into the tropical cyclone season, where we see perhaps tropical cyclones are favored to develop more, say, west of the date line as opposed to east of the date line. Why is that? As we look at January 2026, this large-scale rise will be an area or a source for convection, which is thunderstorms and rainfall, and areas to the east will be a source of suppression or a lack of rainfall. So this will be an area we will have to watch for a source of rain, potentially heavy rainmakers, as we maybe not so much in spring. I wouldn't rule it out in spring, but especially just kind of a heads up. I know our good friend and former colleague Ben will give his big, bold predictions, and I'm certainly not going to attempt to replicate that. But if I had to give a semi-big, bold prediction, I would say as we work into late 2025, say November, and particularly December and beyond, we're going to have to keep our eyes peeled to the north and northwest as a source for big rainfall events. And this is why, going back to the actual seasonal climate outlook, this is why we've identified as northern and eastern areas of the North Island, as well as the top of the South Island. This is an area where if there is going to be above normal rainfall, it is these areas that are favored to see that. And that is because as we transition to a more La Niña-like pattern, keep in mind, going back to the maps, keep in mind what La Niña does is, let's see, what can I use for, I'll use this air pressure map. So look, just bear with me here, okay? What La Niña does is we tend to see high pressure, and I'll just use this as an example, ignore this date here. We're not talking about September 8th. We're talking about big picture, and I'm using this as an example. We tend to find higher pressure southeast or near the South Island or southeast of the South Island and lower pressure to the north. That is what La Niña does, and that is why we see this sort of, when we look at ocean temperature anomalies, when we see cooler ocean temperatures over the central and eastern Pacific and warmer than usual ocean temperatures over the far western Pacific and toward what we call, as I said, the maritime continent, what that does is that it loads the dice for rainmakers to come from the north and come toward New Zealand. So that is why we'll have to watch for that. We tend to have more northeasterly winds or easterly winds, so east to northeast. And what does that do? If we have east to northeast winds, we tend to get drier conditions over toward the west of the South Island. So that is why for much of the South Island, including the western South Island, we have indicated that is an area where dryness may emerge. Not a high certainty, because we are acknowledging that September, as I hit the keyboard there, September is going to be a rather wet period for the western South Island. We are expecting westerlies, but that's going to be an oddball. That's going to be an outlier. We are expecting those westerlies to ease and to be replaced by more east to northeast winds. And if that happens as expected, that would actually start the reduction of rainfall. We would see less rainfall, particularly for the western South Island. So this is something we're going to have to watch as we progress through spring and beyond for potential dryness, maybe even drought if those east to northeast winds unfold as expected. I don't think that'll emerge early in the period, i.e. The springtime, September to November. But I do think once we get past November, if this unfolds as expected, that'll be a genuine or a real concern later this year, and especially as we progress through summer in, say, January and February. So I think that's it for me, just in summary. So there you can see the seasonal climate outlook. Again, this is a theme outlook. There will be days when as I go to temperature, using that as a great example. You may be wondering, Chris, you just said at the beginning there's going to be roller coaster temperatures. We're going to find chilly periods. We will. September there'll be some chilly days. There'll be some frosts. This happens during spring. But I think as we get toward October and November, I think the theme will be more in the way of settled conditions and also warmer temperatures. Keep in mind, spring is that season when we're segueing, pivoting from winter to summer, and is one of the most, if not the most, variable seasons you can find. There's a lot of excitement with spring. And from a weather perspective, it can be quite frustrating because it's hard to predict. It's very challenging. So, look, that is it from me. Hopefully you enjoyed this. If you want to read of the seasonal climate outlook, we produced a document. Some of it is technical, but look, if that's your jam, go for it. Just type in Earth Sciences New Zealand. Remember, we had a name change, as we're with our friends at GNS and our friends at Met Service coming into the fold as well. So lots of exciting things happening. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Ngā mihi nui.